Welcome to the Christian Education Café. I'm your host, Dr. Althea Penn. This is where we equip and empower, as well as encourage, Christian school leaders, educators, parents, and students. Thank you for tuning in. I am thrilled to have you here. Grab your favorite beverage and relax. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast channel so you never miss an episode full of wisdom and encouragement from a biblical perspective. In today's episode, we're diving into an exciting topic, Bible integration in mathematics. Our special guest is none other than Kate Hannon. She's a brilliant author. She's written Revealing Arithmetic, Math Concepts from a Biblical Worldview. Kate is dedicated to helping homeschoolers, Christian educators, and any student really see the beauty of mathematics through the lens of Scripture. She's also the person that helps you to recognize you do use those things you learned in school every day. To give you a bit of context, here's a brief biography of Kate. She's a sinner saved by grace through Jesus Christ, a wife and a mother. She's also a writer, and she's been writing ever since she could hold a pen. In addition to the short stories, articles, and devotionals that you'll find on her site, she's written 2 books on teaching math from a biblical worldview, as well as a junior high and Algebra 2 biblical worldview math curriculum. She's developed numerous mathematics e-courses. Kate started her online ministry, Christian Perspective, right after graduating from homeschool in 2003. She's traveled extensively, sharing her insights and encouragement with homeschoolers across the country and beyond. With the BS in Business Administration, a biblical counseling certification, and a heart full of passion for teaching, Kate continues to inspire and educate. Her hobbies include reading, as well as leading Bible studies and spending time with family and friends. I met Kate and her husband Adam at our church. He's a data scientist and holds graduate degrees in materials science and engineering, physics and polymer and fiber engineering, and I could only imagine their discussions around the intersection of math, science, and our faith. Here's a quote from Roger Erbig on biblical immersion that beautifully captures the essence of our discussion tonight. He says, biblical immersion is the process of integrating God's word into every aspect of our lives, allowing it to shape our thoughts, action, and understanding. And I'm so excited tonight to have Kate on our broadcast to talk about integrating the Bible into mathematics. It's a topic that will enrich and deepen our appreciation for both our faith, God's character, and the sphere of education, where it better helps us to understand God's nature. Stay tuned for an insightful conversation that blends wisdom, faith, and academic excellence. Kate, welcome. Well, welcome to the Christian Education Café Podcast. Kate, we're so excited about you being with us and us talking about your book, Revealing Arithmetic. I am so very excited about this topic. It's near and dear to my heart. Even with the little ones in my early learning program that I had years ago, I just loved introducing them to the concept of math because I saw God's character revealed in it, the order of creation. And so I'm very excited about you joining us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
I'm so excited. Let's jump right in. Can you tell me a little bit or tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write Revealing Arithmetic?
Sure. Well, I was blessed to have a Christian education. My mom had homeschooled me from first grade on, and we looked for God in subjects. We saw history as his story. We saw science as his handiwork. But we saw math as just this neutral set of facts and figures that you just learned because you learned, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like the one subject where I didn't really understand how it could be viewed biblically, apart from maybe if you're teaching division, talk about how God divided the Red Sea, but like that wasn't really showing me why math itself was part of God's handiwork. And it wasn't until a senior in high school when my mom had me read a book called Mathematics is God Silent that really goes through the whole history of math and shows how, apart from a biblical God, we can't even account for our ability to count. And I was just blown away because I'm
Yeah.
like, well, wait a minute, worldviews in math? Like, this is not what I realized. And when I went back and thought about what was I learning all those years, I was really learning naturalistic and humanistic thinking in my neutral math classes. And I didn't want other parents and children to experience that. And so people were like, well, you should write something simple that anyone can digest and get this idea. And I'm like, okay, that wasn't my plan at all. But the Lord made it really clear it was His. And so I started researching and I wrote a little overview book called Beyond Numbers at first. And then people were like, we want more details. We want ready to go information that we can just pick up and use with our children. And so that led to revealing arithmetic. And so I've been now researching and writing and speaking on math for over 20 years. But
Wow.
yeah, that was how the journey kind of got started.
Wow. Well, I think you probably chuckled at me because I think when we first met and you told me about the book, I mentioned something about how with my little students, I would teach one is God's number because there's only one true God, and two is the number of agreement or division, and three is for the Trinity, and how God just reveals himself through numerical concepts. But your book revealed even to me that it's so much more,
Mhm. It is
so
so much.
much more than that. So let's talk about some of the key themes and principles in revealing arithmetic that you believe are particularly relevant to Christian educators. If you're teaching math, what are
Mhm.
some principles that are so important that we need to make sure are the foundation?
Well, I think the biggest thing to kind of wrap our minds around is a switch of not just looking at the math itself as this neutral thing, but as a part of God's creation. You know, if you think about science, I like to just walk through that because it's easier for us to connect with science. But you look at a tree, everyone can agree on some of the mechanics of the tree, how photosynthesis works, right? Whether you're Muslim, Christian, or atheist, we can say this is how photosynthesis works. But
Yeah.
our worldview affects a lot about how we view that tree, right? Where did it come from? Why is it that creation operates consistently? Well, it's because in a biblical worldview, it's because God created it, God is sustaining it. How should we approach it? Well, we should view it as part of his creation. We should use it for his glory, right? We should be depending on him
Yeah.
as we explore science. And it's that same kind of thinking that we want to apply to math. One plus one equals two, right?
Yeah.
It does, whether you're a Muslim, Christian, or atheist. Well, why though? Well, because God made a consistent world. And there is a consistency throughout creation that he is holding in place so reliably and so predictably that we can call it a fact and we can memorize our addition facts and our multiplication facts and we can rely on them. And how should we use them? Well, we should use them depending on him for his glory, recognizing that math's very existence is because there is an orderly, faithful, never changing creator who's holding creation together in that consistent fashion. And so it's kind of like this whole switch. And if we see that way, then it's not just this intellectual pursuit that we like memorize these facts that appear to go nowhere, right? We want to actually apply math as a tool to explore God's creation and show students how everything they're learning really does apply outside of a textbook and give them that joy of using math as a tool to explore God's creation, knowing that the only reason we can do it too is that because we're made in God's image. You know, the Bible
Yeah.
gives us this foundation of why the universe is consistent and why we're even able to recognize that order and consistency is because we are made in God's image. He gave us the task of subduing the earth. Math is a tool we use in that. And so we want to equip students to do that
Yeah.
rather than just teaching these meaningless things. I think it was Alfred Whitehead who said there's nothing more detrimental to true education than facts that lead nowhere. Like we don't just want to teach bookwork. We want to equip them to serve the Lord however he calls them to one day, right? And math is a tool that helps them in that. So it's like this whole different switch, which is requires more than just like adding a Bible verse then to the top of the page. It requires really changing how we teach the math itself.
Yeah. I love that because what I hear you saying is we're not just introducing children to the Bible or the Word, we're introducing children to the God of the Bible or the God of math. We're
Mhm.
introducing them to a person through the tool of math. I think about how you mentioned a tree. And God divinely designed trees to speak
Mhm.
of his nature and even his purpose for creating us to worship him and bring him glory, just like that tree does in the way that it grows. And I love the mathematical patterns that we even see in trees, like pine cones or in plants altogether, the Fibonacci sequence. And,
Mhm.
there are just so many ways we see God's order and his design in math and nature, and it should speak to us about order and design and purpose for our lives. So I love that. I
And God
love that.
cares for us. Talking about the Fibonacci sequence, sunflowers, if you look at like the spirals in a sunflower, the number of spirals going in each direction, there's two directions that they spiral. And if you look at the ratio between the number spiraling in each direction, which is math, you're looking at a ratio, right?
Yeah,
Always about the same. And it turns out that exact ratio enables the most number of seeds to fit in a sunflower. And when you think about the care God took with a sunflower,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
How much more does he care for us? Like when we use math to explore his creation, we absolutely do see just this incredible design and care, and it points us to his wisdom, it points us to his power. It
Mhm.
should encourage us to trust him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so exciting. And I think that in your book, you provide many practical applications. So, how can Christian educators integrate the principles from your book into their teaching practices? And are
Well,
there manipulatives you would recommend? We were just talking about nature, and that's a great manipulative.
Well, and I was going to say a lot of the actual manipulatives, there's a lot of different ones that probably come with your curriculum and you don't have to reinvent the wheel there. But revealing arithmetic is arranged by topic. So like when you're teaching multi-digit addition, you just go to the multi-digit addition chapter and there you have some ideas of things you can add to your curriculum to kind of take the student beyond just manipulatives to seeing, oh wow, this is in real life too, and to connect it in with science and history. Because a lot of times you get the impression, I know I got the impression growing up, that those things in the math book just had always existed in the math book, right? And you miss out on understanding that men used their God-given abilities to explore creation, to discover ways to represent the orderly way that God created everything that we see around us, right?
Yeah,
Well, multiplication methods and step-by-step processes that we just kind of teach by rote now, those came from men exploring and finding different ways. How can we, use a limited set of facts we can memorize to solve any problem we need to
yeah.
solve, right? What step-by-step process could we use? And
Mhm.
really, when math was first switching over to paper math after paper became more readily available, every mathematician had a different way of doing it, different symbols that they used. We tend to associate like this is the division symbol today. Well, back then, you'd have to check the book to see what they were using for division and for multiplication because it would be different. And we've lost sight of that for students to understand like this didn't just appear in a book. This was men exploring God's creation. But the consistency has stayed the same because the consistency is what God created and he sustains no matter how we describe it or how we write it. And so there's a lot of different ideas that you can bring in at an age appropriate level for the student. Obviously, you're not going to show them different division signs when you're first teaching division, but like as they're further along, you can introduce and help them understand some of the history and how they can actually use that then outside of a textbook. So there's simple examples of like how we use it in cooking or how we can use it in everyday situations that you can then share with your child or your students. Like the sunflower example I mentioned earlier, there's a worksheet in there that you can have students use to really get to explore that ratio on their own when they're looking at ratios. So those are kind of the things that you'll find inside of there. I want to share a verse, Jeremiah 33:25 through 26, because like this is the perspective that I really try to help parents see how they can bring in for each of those concepts that they're teaching or teachers. Um, it says, Thus says the Lord, if I have not established my covenant with day and night and the fixed order of heaven and earth. So fixed order means like consistencies, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are all consistencies. It's fixed order.
Yeah.
Then I will reject the offspring of Jacob and David, my servant. So he's saying, look around you. You can see I'm keeping my covenant with the fixed order. I've created this world in an orderly way, and I'm keeping that. You can see that. All right. And I'm going to be just as faithful to my other promise. And so every time a student solves a math problem and they see, hey, 4 plus 4 really equals 8 outside of a textbook. It is screaming at them that God is still keeping his covenant with the fixed order that he created, and that he is a covenant keeping God, and that they need to heed whatever God has said because he's going to keep it. God
Yeah.
has promised that salvation is through Jesus Christ alone. We need to pay attention to that. We need to listen to what he said because he is a covenant keeping God. And that's what we don't want to lose sight of as we teach it. And so the book is designed to really help parents and educators understand that and be able to communicate that as they're teaching all these different concepts.
Yeah, I think it would make such a difference if students learn that way too, because it gives them a sense of purpose that, like even Jesus said, look at the lilies and consider
Mhm.
the birds. Because if they have purpose and I care and they have value, how much more, as you said earlier, do you? I
Yeah.
had earmarked some of my pages in your book because there were so many great things you were talking about. You break down the where, the why, the when, all of that here. And I think it's just a great tool for any Christian educator, no matter what grade level. But you've also written curriculum. Share a little bit about that as well, because this is just like a primer on the biblical worldview, right? And I noticed in here you said it's not just for young students, but older students that may need to review fundamental concepts. So revealing arithmetic is basic biblical worldview, right? And then you've written some curriculum and courses, of course, as well. Tell us a little bit about all of those
Yeah,
resources.
so revealing arithmetic is designed to like supplement a curriculum is kind of how I think about it. So like especially for the elementary years, it'll cover the main concepts that your curriculum's covering. So you can have that biblical worldview to kind of bring in and ideas. And then older students could go through it to kind of firm up those foundational concepts. Because a lot of kids, when they get to algebra, they're struggling in algebra because they didn't understand something earlier on. So this is a great way to kind of help them firm that up. But the curriculum that I've written starts in junior high and then it goes through high school. And it's Principles of Mathematics is the first book. And then there's the book 2 of Principles of Mathematics. And then I do e-courses for geometry and algebra 1. And then I wrote an algebra 2 course, and I'm working on a consumer math course right now. But the goal of all of them is to really show the student everything that they're learning. How is this a tool that helps me serve the Lord, that explores God's creation? How is it pointing to him? So that they're not left at the end of the day going, why? Why am I studying this? What's the purpose? They understand that purpose. And so that's really why I, wrote the different curriculums.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that you've provided such rich resources. And it's like you're taking the cookies, putting them on the bottom shelf for us, making it very simple. Because sometimes curriculum can be very scripted and you don't get the why. But I
Mhm.
love the way that you broke down the why here. And I'm sure in your curriculum, your textbooks, you also kind of really focus on the why, the purpose behind having a biblical worldview in math.
Yeah.
What are some of the, yeah,
I'm sorry, I was just gonna say I have e-courses too to go with it so that if someone's
okay.
not a reader, they can, like, watch it and
Yeah,
watch it work.
I think that's very helpful for homeschooling parents. Math was not my strong suit, even though I've been I've worked in accounting for years. I like the order of math. I like the security that it provided for me. But when it came to remembering the formulas and things, like you said, I didn't understand their purpose behind them. So a lot of times, I remember homeschooling, teaching my daughter physics in high school, and I'd write an equation on the board, and she'd say, "Mom, that's wrong." And she'd come up and change, like, an integer or something. And she was like, "Okay, now it's right." She's like, "Go on."
Nice.
This, one of my daughters is just more concrete, sequential than I am. I tend to be a little bit more abstract when it comes to math. Um, but it was really interesting to see that. What are some common challenges that you see in teaching math within a Christian framework, and how can they be addressed?
I feel like the biggest challenge is just understanding that it's not just about adding a Bible verse, that it's really trying to understand how the concepts you're teaching really do apply outside the textbook, and showing your child rather than just telling your child, hey, God created math, now go learn it. You want to really show them. I like to think of like cooking. You would not teach your
Mhm.
child how to cook by giving them a textbook for 8 years and saying, study this, and believe me, it applies, right? You would take them into the kitchen and let them actually cook. Or they're going to think they hate cooking when they really never got a chance to cook. And so many students think they hate math because they've just been taught it as these rote facts and they
Yeah.
don't really understand how it describes God's creation and they don't really see it or be equipped to use it as a tool. And so I like to think of all of the different concepts of math as tools, but they come wrapped in wrapping paper, and you got to dig past the wrapping paper. There's a lot of big words, fancy ideas, but if you dig past all of that, every concept is really a tool. Now, some tools, we have tools that we use all the time, like screwdriver, right? It's pretty
Yeah.
easy to figure out how to use a tool and use that, and it applies lots of different places. There's other tools that might take specialized training, and you only use in a specialized shop, but it's really powerful at what it does, right? And so there's some concepts in math that are less intuitive and that take a little bit more time to learn, but it's just because they're that much higher powered of a tool, right? And so as you get into algebra and geometry, a lot of that is trigonometry and calculus. They're high powered tools that help us design planes and
Yeah.
explore the intricacies of God's creation. And as we go, wow, this is complicated, we should be going, wow, think of how amazing God is. He made a world that it takes all this just to begin to describe.
Yeah.
And it's a
Yeah.
very, very powerful tool. And you want to dig past it
Yeah.
until your child and students see it as that powerful tool.
Yeah. And then I love to, like you talked about, some things about math are intuitive. It's like you get this output is guaranteed when you have this input. Um, and it makes me think about AI and technology. And so this is my last question. What are your future plans and projects related to mathematics and Christian education? And if you want to talk about how that impacts, how AI and technology might impact that, I'd love to hear that because right now the data is kind of heartbreaking when you read that less than 40% of students are performing at grade level in fourth grade and eighth grade in mathematics, when future careers are going to be so mathematically um, based, or I don't know, you're going to have a good concept of math, and even not be intimidated by technology. So what are your future plans or thoughts regarding?
Well, as far as future plans, I'm just working on the consumer math course and we'll see where the Lord takes me from there. But I think it's really important that we recognize the importance of technology and not be afraid of it. Like I've seen, we don't want to shy away from science, basically. As AI becomes more and more what people turn to, we need Christian data scientists that are writing AI programs that can give biblical answers to things. And it's very important that we educate children so that they can enter into that world and shine Christ's light in the midst of it, because it really is our heritage. If you go back and you look at the scientific revolution, men like Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton, they feared,
Galileo? Yeah.
yeah, they were able to use math
Mhm.
to explore God's creation because they believed creation was explorable. You have to have a biblical worldview to really have that and have it make sense. People often operate contradictory to their worldview, but the biblical worldview is what really makes sense out of our ability to do that. And we see that in the scientific revolution. And if you go back and you actually read the works of Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton, as they're presenting their earth-breaking discoveries, they take breaks to praise God. You feel like you're reading a devotional in one moment, and then you're reading this really technical with tons of math
Yeah.
explanation of how the world operates. They didn't see a contradiction between science and God. They saw it together. And we
Absolutely.
want to educate students to do that so that they're prepared then to shine forth God's light into technological fields.
Yeah, wherever they are in the marketplace or ministry,
Yeah.
absolutely. I am so grateful for your taking your time to share with us today. Do you have any last thoughts or anything on your heart you'd like to share with Christian parents and educators, as it just relates to a biblical worldview? I think that, in our current political climate and just the culture, just the way that it is, it's so post-Christian or postmodern, whichever one you want to use, which term, every term. Um, I think this is essential. Anything that you'd like to share as we're closing?
Yeah, I'd like to share 2 Corinthians 3:18. In the NASB it says, "But we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory." So it's as we behold the glory of the Lord, we're transformed. And we talked about that earlier. Like as you study math, as you see, wow, God's holding all things together this consistently, that we can use algebra to describe gravity, and then we can build planes based on that and expect that they will work day after day after day after day. Well, that's because God is the same day after day after day after day. I can trust him today just like I could yesterday, even though my world feels like it's falling apart today. And you could end up in the deepest dungeon of your life, and 1 + 1 still equals 2. God is still on his throne. He is still over all of that. And you want every area of your academics to be showing students that. And math does not have to be an exception from that. Like math itself should be declaring his praise. And I want to encourage educators that if math isn't your strength, God is the source of all wisdom. He understands, he can get it, and he can help you convey that. It can be a journey that you all go on together into exploring his handiwork. And it is an important journey because if we're not displaying God's glory in math, then what we're ending up displaying is naturalism and humanism. Because when you think about it, math works, right?
Yeah.
And your students are going to figure that out. But if they're not taught why, I know as a kid growing up, I was like, Mom, why? Why does this work? Why? And she was just like, it just does. Would you please learn it and stop asking me why questions, right? But what that was subtly doing to me was teaching me I can trust math. I
Mhm.
can trust man. Well, what is that? That's naturalism and humanism, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
Secular
the
communism.
real message should be, I can trust God.
Yeah.
And when I entered those teenage years and started questioning things and deciding, do I really believe this because my parents taught me it or because
Yeah.
it's real? Math was a hurdle for me. I was like, I want mathematical proof of God's existence. Why did I want that? Because I'd been taught, trust math, trust mathematicians. They got to figure it out. Instead of math should have been shouting out at me, hey, apart from a biblical God, you don't have an explanation for why any of science exists and why math even works. And so math is either building up your students' faith or it is slowly, subtly tearing it down. There is no neutral. And if you can know that, then it can help as you're teaching. So that would be kind of my parting encouragement is like it matters and
Yeah.
God can help you with it. And yes, it's very easy to just get bombarded with all of the facts that need memorized. And we do need to memorize them and we do need to work with all that, but don't lose sight of what math really is and who it's really glorifying as you do that.
Yeah. And our whole goal is to teach our children to love and serve God. And
Mhm.
math is just one tool that He's given us to do that. So I really am so grateful for you joining me today. This has been so inspiring. Thank you, Kate, for your time and just your
Mhm.
wealth of wisdom. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Christian Education Cafe podcast. I hope that this discussion has been inspiring and even thought-provoking for Christian educators and parents who listened in, and I pray that it helps you to navigate the challenges that you find with teaching from a biblical worldview in this aspect of education. Well, join us next time for another enlightening episode. Thanks again, Kate. And please continue to cultivate faith in our next generation of young learners. God bless.